1920s beauty salon, when massive hooded dryers represented the technological revolution in personal grooming, as professional beauty services became middle-class amenities rather than elite luxuries, capturing the roaring 20s explosion of the beauty industry driven by shorter hairstyles and new fashion standards that created demand for regular salon visits and transformed appearance maintenance from private home activity into commercial services, representing how consumer culture and changing gender expectations combined to create entire industries around female beauty that would grow into multi-billion-dollar businesses while simultaneously making beauty labor seem both mandatory and empowering, demonstrating capitalism's ability to turn social expectations into economic opportunities that reinforce the very standards they claim to help women achieve. 1980s aerobics class, when fitness culture exploded with colorful spandex and synchronized exercise routines becoming mainstream leisure activity, representing the health consciousness boom and the commercialization of wellness that made working out fashionable rather than merely functional, capturing the moment when exercise transitioned from sports training to lifestyle identity, and when the fitness industry created new beauty standards and body expectations that would intensify body image pressures. 1928, when basketball inventor James Naismith played with his wife using a peach basket decades after creating the game in 1891 to keep students active during Massachusetts winters, capturing the humble origins of a sport that had already spread globally, but that Naismith created simply to solve the practical problem of indoor exercise, without imagining it would become a professional multi-billion-dollar industry, representing how innovations often exceed their creators' intentions, as basketball evolved from makeshift winter activity using peach baskets and soccer balls into a worldwide phenomenon with professional leagues, international competitions, and cultural influence that transformed the game Naismith invented as a fitness solution into entertainment spectacle and athletic art form he never envisioned. 1980s shopping mall, when enclosed commercial spaces became suburban gathering places representing consumer culture's peak and the retail boom, before online shopping would devastate physical stores, capturing the era when malls served as social centers for teenagers and family entertainment destinations, symbolizing American prosperity and the suburban lifestyle that car ownership enabled, demonstrating how retail architecture created the consumer experience that would eventually migrate online. 1910, when this woman driving a Buick represented the pioneering era of female motorists who challenged social conventions about women's technical capability, while automobiles transitioned from luxury novelties to practical transportation that would reshape society, capturing early adoption of technology that faced skepticism about women operating complex machinery, but that would eventually provide independence and mobility, transforming gender roles as car ownership democratized travel and enabled suburban living, representing how the automobile revolution began with wealthy early adopters like this confident driver before mass production would make cars accessible to middle-class families and create the car-dependent culture defining 20th century American life with all its freedom and environmental consequences. Netherlands March, 1979. When Philips engineer Joop Sinju introduced the compact disc that would revolutionize music distribution by replacing vinyl records and cassette tapes with digital technology promising perfect sound that never degraded, representing the moment when consumer electronics entered the digital age through collaboration between Philips and Sony that transformed music industry, economics, and listening habits as CDs made collections portable and permanent, capturing the technology that would dominate music sales for 2 decades before digital downloads and streaming would make even CDs obsolete, demonstrating how each generation's revolutionary format eventually becomes outdated as technology continues evolving, and how the CD's brief dominance represented a transitional moment between analog physical media and the fully digital streaming services that would eventually eliminate physical formats entirely. Venice, 1955. When drained canals revealed the muddy, unglamorous reality beneath the romantic waterways tourists never see, showing workers removing debris and repairing foundations in periodic maintenance that strips away illusions of effortless beauty, defining the city's image, representing the constant labor required to preserve historic cities against environmental degradation, and demonstrating that cultural treasures demand dirty infrastructure work, contradicting romanticized versions sold to visitors who experience only carefully maintained surfaces, capturing the gap between tourist fantasy and practical reality as Venice's survival depends on regular, unglamorous interventions that the tourism industry carefully hides to maintain the magical illusion that keeps the economy functioning while the actual city slowly sinks beneath rising seas that threaten to make these maintenance efforts eventually futile. Paris, 1970, when cars parked directly beneath the Eiffel Tower, in an era prioritizing automobile convenience over pedestrian experience, before cities began reclaiming public spaces from vehicles, representing peak car-centric urban planning, when even iconic landmarks accommodated the automobile culture dominating post-war design, capturing the moment before environmental concerns and tourism management led Paris to pedestrianize areas around major monuments and create the carefully controlled visitor experience defining modern tourism, demonstrating how urban priorities shifted from maximizing car access to protecting landmark settings and improving pedestrian environments as cities recognized that automobile dominance degraded the very attractions drawing visitors, and that reclaiming space for walking enhanced rather than restricted public enjoyment of cultural treasures. 1930s, hobo camp when unemployed men rode freight trains seeking work and created makeshift communities near railroad yards, representing the massive displacement caused by Great Depression that forced millions into transient poverty and demonstrated how quickly economic collapse could destroy stable lives, capturing the survival strategies of workers who maintain dignity and mutual support despite destitution, while society blamed them for circumstances beyond their control, demonstrating how economic systems can fail catastrophically, leaving victims to create informal networks for basic survival. 1950s suburban development, when mass housing construction created identical neighborhoods, enabling post-war middle-class expansion and white flight from urban areas, representing the American dream of home ownership that government subsidies made accessible while reinforcing racial segregation through discriminatory lending practices, capturing the suburban boom that would reshape American geography and create car-dependent sprawl with lasting environmental and social consequences. Encino, California, 1962, when Piggly Wiggly supermarket cashiers stood in regimented uniformed rows embodying the strict service standards and feminine presentation requirements, defining retail work as grocery shopping transitioned from neighborhood stores to suburban chains requiring armies of identically dressed female workers processing the consumer goods explosion, serving post-war middle-class families, representing how service industries imposed appearance codes and behavioral expectations on predominantly female workforces, while selling convenience and abundance, characterizing American prosperity, capturing the moment when supermarkets became temples of consumer culture, where standardized presentation and efficient checkout systems enabled the mass consumption defining suburban lifestyle, and demonstrating how retail expansion created employment opportunities for women, but within frameworks that reinforced traditional gender expectations about appropriate female labor and appearance. 1975, when Pelé taught President Gerald Ford soccer skills as part of the effort to establish professional football in America by recruiting the world's greatest player to the North American Soccer League, representing the optimistic attempt to popularize a sport in a nation dominated by baseball and American football through celebrity power and international star appeal. Capturing the moment when sports diplomacy deployed football's biggest name to transform American athletic culture. Though mainstream acceptance would take decades longer than organizers hoped, as soccer remained a youth participation sport rather than professional spectator entertainment until the 1990s World Cup and subsequent MLS establishment finally created the foundation that Pelé's pioneering North American stint had tried to build 20 years earlier. 1935, when Malcolm Campbell's Bluebird attracted massive press coverage as land speed records captured public imagination, representing technological progress and national prestige during the interwar period, when pushing mechanical limits symbolized human ambition and engineering capability. With this streamlined vehicle eventually reaching 301.1 miles per hour, breaking barriers impossible just decades earlier when cars barely exceeded horse speeds, demonstrating how speed record attempts became international spectacles, combining innovation and courage that offered hopeful distraction from depression economics and rising political tensions, while advancing automotive technology through extreme testing that would eventually influence commercial vehicle design. Capturing the moment when individual daredevils pushing boundaries generated the kind of public fascination now reserved for space exploration, as speed records represented humanity's relationship with technology and the perpetual drive to go faster regardless of practical purpose. 1920s speakeasy, when flapper girls danced the Charleston in illegal nightclubs during Prohibition, representing the decade's rebellion against Victorian morality through jazz music, short skirts, and open defiance of alcohol laws that created massive organized crime networks, while establishing the Roaring Twenties culture of liberation that would end with the Great Depression. Capturing the moment when young Americans rejected traditional values and embraced modern urban culture that mixed entertainment with law-breaking in underground venues, where cultural revolution happened alongside criminal enterprise. 1950s living room, when families gathered around their first television sets, mesmerized by the new technology that would transform American culture by bringing entertainment, news, and advertising directly into homes, representing the post-war prosperity that made consumer electronics accessible to middle-class families and creating the shared media experience that would dominate the second half of the 20th century. Capturing the moment when television began reshaping politics, family dynamics, and social interaction in ways that would define modern life. 1930s, breadlines when unemployed men waited for charity food during the Great Depression that devastated the American economy and destroyed the belief that hard work guaranteed prosperity, representing the massive suffering caused by economic collapse that would eventually lead to New Deal programs and fundamental changes in how government addressed poverty, capturing the desperation of workers who had lost everything through circumstances beyond their control, yet were blamed for their destitution by a society that preferred blaming victims to acknowledging systemic failure. 1960s psychedelic concert, when counterculture youth gathered for rock performances with light shows that mixed music with visual art, creating immersive experiences, rejecting mainstream culture, representing the decade's youth rebellion expressed through long hair, drug experimentation, and opposition to Vietnam War that challenged authority and traditional values. Capturing the moment when rock music became vehicle for social protest and cultural transformation that would influence subsequent generations despite the movement's eventual commercialization and absorption into mainstream entertainment industry. 1940s munitions factory, when women took industrial jobs during World War II, proving their capability in skilled labor traditionally reserved for men, representing the temporary expansion of women's economic opportunities that demonstrated female competence authorities had denied, but would try reversing once soldiers returned home. Capturing the paradox where wartime emergency created progressive change that peacetime society resisted maintaining, despite evidence that gender restrictions on labor were arbitrary rather than natural. 1970s disco, when mirror balls and platform shoes defined nightlife culture, celebrating hedonistic dancing and sexual liberation before AIDS crisis would end the carefree party, representing the brief moment when disco dominated popular music and created integrated spaces where different communities mixed on dance floors, capturing the phenomenon that would face massive backlash, revealing underlying racial and homophobic tensions in American culture that the disco demolition night would expose when the genre's sudden death demonstrated how quickly cultural movements can collapse. 1950s drive-in theater, when families watched movies from their cars in the quintessential post-war leisure activity combining automobile culture with entertainment, representing suburban America's car-dependent lifestyle and the baby boom generation's childhood before television would make home entertainment more convenient. Capturing the peak of drive-in culture that would decline as multiplex theaters and later home video made the outdoor automotive movie experience obsolete despite its nostalgic appeal. 1980s arcade, when teenagers gathered in neon-lit spaces playing early video games that would evolve into the massive gaming industry dominating modern entertainment, representing the digital revolution's beginning, when coin-operated machines created social spaces for youth before home consoles and later online gaming would make arcades largely obsolete. Capturing the moment when interactive electronic entertainment transitioned from novelty to cultural force that would reshape how generations experience play and competition. 1960s lunch counter sit-in, when civil rights activists peacefully protested segregation by occupying whites-only spaces and enduring harassment without retaliation, representing the nonviolent resistance strategy that would help dismantle Jim Crow laws through moral pressure and media coverage that exposed racial injustice to national audiences, capturing the courage of protesters who face violence and arrest to challenge systems of oppression, demonstrating that social change requires individuals willing to suffer for principles. 1960s Carnaby Street, when mod fashion boutiques in London sold mini skirts and geometric designs to youth rejecting traditional clothing standards, representing the swinging 60s cultural revolution, where British working class creativity challenged elite fashion dominance and youth culture became global export, capturing the moment when clothing became political statement and generational identity marker as fashion democratized and young people used style to signal rejection of parental values and embrace of modern liberation. 1920s Ford assembly line, when mass production techniques revolutionized manufacturing by breaking complex tasks into simple repetitive motions that workers could perform quickly, representing industrial efficiency that made automobiles affordable to middle-class buyers while creating monotonous, dehumanizing labor conditions. Capturing Henry Ford's innovation that would define 20th century manufacturing and demonstrate how technological progress simultaneously improves living standards and degrades working conditions. 1950s modern kitchen, when new appliances and pastel colors symbolized post-war domestic prosperity and the idealized suburban housewife role that women's liberation would later challenge, representing consumer culture boom that made household technology accessible while reinforcing traditional gender expectations about women's domestic responsibilities. Capturing the contradiction where labor-saving devices supposedly freed women's time, but actually raised cleanliness standards requiring equivalent effort while confining female identity to homemaking. 1940s train station farewell, when families said goodbye to soldiers departing for World War II, uncertain if they would return, representing the massive mobilization that sent millions overseas while transforming home front society, capturing the emotional cost of war that photographs emphasized while leaving invisible. The family tensions and difficult psychological adjustments many veterans would face when returning to country that expected them to resume normal life as if combat hadn't changed them. 1970s gas lines, when oil crisis caused by Arab embargo created fuel shortages, exposing American dependence on foreign petroleum, representing the economic disruption that challenged post-war prosperity assumptions and demonstrated vulnerability of car-dependent culture, capturing the frustration of drivers waiting hours for rationed gasoline during the crisis that would eventually influence energy policy debates about fossil fuel reliance. Though fundamental changes to consumption patterns never materialized. 1930s Dust Bowl, when environmental disaster combined with economic depression to destroy Great Plains farming communities, forcing massive migration, representing the ecological catastrophe caused by unsustainable agricultural practices that depleted soil and created devastating storms. Capturing families losing farms through circumstances beyond their control, yet blamed for destitution by communities that feared poor migrants would drain resources, demonstrating how environmental and economic crises intersect. 1960s astronaut training, when NASA prepared for moon landing during space race competing with Soviet Union for technological supremacy, representing Cold War competition channeled into scientific achievement, and the moment when reaching space seemed to validate American system superiority, capturing the massive investment in space exploration driven by geopolitical rivalry that would produce genuine scientific advances while demonstrating how nationalism motivates technological progress. 1990s grunge concert, when Seattle alternative rock rejected 1980s commercial excess through deliberately raw sound and anti-fashion aesthetic, representing Generation X's cultural expression, and the brief moment when underground music became mainstream before commercialization would commodify the anti-commercial stance, capturing the irony of rebellion against consumer culture becoming profitable product that record companies marketed to the very audiences it supposedly rejected. 1910's suffragette march, when women demanded voting rights, carrying banners through city streets in Edwardian dresses, facing public ridicule and police harassment, representing the decades-long struggle for political equality that would finally succeed with the 19th Amendment in 1920, capturing the courage of activists who endured social ostracism and physical danger to challenge male political monopoly, demonstrating that fundamental rights require organized, persistent struggle against entrenched power rather than being granted voluntarily. 1950s soda fountain, when teenagers gathered at diner counters, creating their own social space, separate from adult supervision, while jukebox music and milkshakes defined innocent youth culture, representing the emergence of distinct teenage identity and consumer market targeting adolescence as demographic with disposable income and cultural influence, capturing the post-war prosperity that created leisure time and spending money for young people, establishing patterns of youth culture and generational identity that would intensify through subsequent decades. 1970s punk street, when London youth created deliberately anti-fashion aesthetic using safety pins, torn clothing, and mohawk hairstyles to reject both mainstream culture and hippie idealism, representing working class frustration with economic decline and the emergence of aggressive subcultural rebellion that would influence music and fashion globally, capturing the moment when punk's DIY ethos and confrontational style challenged consumer culture's polished presentation, while ironically becoming commodified itself as the rebellious aesthetic it created was absorbed into commercial fashion industry.